Welcome. We're going to start this evening a new section of Tanya, the great work that exposes our souls, reveals to us what's going on inside of us in a way that, though it was written 300 years ago, almost, it is more relevant today than it has ever been. The great work Tanya by Rabbi Zalman of the Adi. We have already studied the first 8 chapters of Tanya, which is one section. You could call it almost the first chamber of Tanya. And tonight we're entering into the second one. In the first chamber, Rabbi Zalman introduced to us the ingredients of our soul, what we're dealing with. Before you can start understanding what's going on inside of you, you need to know what you're dealing with, what you've got. What are the ingredients, the anatomy of your soul? And that Rabbi Zalman laid out very clearly in the first 8 chapters of his work. His main points there were that each one of us have not one but 2 souls, 2 distinct souls. One of them is known as the animal soul, the other one the divine soul. The animal soul is the drive we have, instinctive drive to survive, to live, to look after ourselves, to be comfortable, and to be well fed. It's simple self-preservation, the drive to self-preservation. It's a soul, it's a spiritual drive. It's an energy. It's not a part of our body. It's a drive within our deeper self. However, it's no deeper than self. It's just about self. That is the animalistic soul. We also have a divine soul. That is our higher self. That's the part of us that is a piece of God and yearns to reconnect with its source, with God. Is altruistic, is good, is pure, is selfless, is not just interested in self, but is interested in truth, in oneness, in goodness, in that which is moral, that which is really true. And so while the animal soul seeks what is good for me, the divine soul seeks what is good, what is really good, what is actually good. The animal soul is purely there for self. The divine soul is selfless, there for truth. These 2 parts of our personality are full in their makeup. In other words, they're not just little bits of us, they are total personas within ourselves. You've got a complete animalistic soul, a complete divine soul that is comprehensive, that covers every part of your personality. Meaning that the divine soul has powers of intellect, it has emotions, it has the ability to express itself in thought, in speech, in action. The animal soul also has intellect and emotions, and the garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. It can express itself. At any one moment, only one of these souls is in control and is being expressed. So every thought you have, every word you say, and every move that you make is governed, inspired by one of those souls. Either it's an animalistic move that is selfish in its nature, or it's an altruistic move, thought, word that is divine in its nature. It is driven by your understanding, your perception of the world, and your feelings towards the world. Everything we say, we do, or we think is because we have an attitude to it, we have a feeling towards it that drives us to react to it. And your animal soul has its mentality, its way of thinking, its view of the world. It has its drives, urges, and wants. And if the animal soul is in charge, so then it will be animalistic, selfish drives that will be expressed. If the divine soul is in charge, so then it will be altruistic drives that will be expressed. Now, in the first 8 chapters, Rabbi Zalman explained that here, when we're talking about the animal versus the divine, we're not talking about just horrendous evil acts of the animal soul, and the divine soul is only acts of holiness and elevated spiritual acts. There is a lot in between. Between good and evil is most of our lives. Most of our lives we spend doing things that are neither particularly holy or particularly unholy. They're just what they are. We eat, we sleep, we work, we do stuff that is, we would think of being neutral. While the divine soul is clearly the one that does acts of goodness, charitable acts of kindness. It's our divine soul that wants us to pray and to study Torah. Our animal soul is the one that wants us to go against the rules of morality and feed us our needs regardless of what's right and wrong. But there's a lot in between. And that is the stuff that's not right, not wrong, it's just is. eating lunch, eating breakfast, sleeping, and going for a walk. It's not a sin. It's also not an innately holy act. Rabbi Shneur Zalman said, nothing is really in between. Every act we do is going to either strengthen our animal soul or strengthen our divine soul, depending on the intent behind it. When you eat a permissible meal, and you eat in order to strengthen yourself, to have the power to do more good in the world, to fulfill your mission, that meal is an accessory to goodness. It's on the side of holiness. It's an act that is inspired, and it fuels the divine soul. Whereas if you eat merely in a gluttonous way, in a self-serving way, purely to indulge in your own appetite, that's an animalistic act. It's not evil, it's not immoral, you've not done nothing wrong, you just ate. But when you eat in a gluttonous way, in a selfish way, without the intent to energize yourself to do good, so then you've strengthened your animalistic side. You've tended towards that way. And every act, therefore, everything we do is one way or the other. Either we're strengthening our divine energy, our divine self, our higher self, our divine soul, or we're strengthening the animal soul. This is, in a nutshell, the first 8 chapters of Tanya.
What about in a situation where you have to defend yourself against an animal that's trying to kill you or someone trying to kill you, and you have to physically?
Okay, so defending oneself is an obligation. It's a mitzvah to defend yourself. If you're being attacked, so then the moral thing to do is to defend yourself. That's not an animalistic act. The question is, if you're talking about defending life, certainly. But we extend that to defend ourselves on many other levels. Like we defend sometimes our honor because we feel somebody slighting our honor, so we need to stand up for our own honor. That might be tending into the animalistic, self-serving. That may not be saving life. But when you're being attacked, then you have to stand up for yourself. That's a moral duty. The first 8 chapters are to tell us what we've got. We've got these 2 souls, and they've got these faculties, and they express themselves through the garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. What we're going to enter into now is chapter 9 onwards. The next 9 chapters enter into the next stage of understanding the interaction between these 2 souls. How these 2 souls work within us, what they want from themselves, from us, and what they want from each other. That until now we've just learnt about each one individually. This one in that corner and that one in the other corner. Now we're going to understand how does it work when these 2 are inhabiting the same body. What do they want from each other? And what do they want from us? This is chapter 9 of Tanya. And this is called the fight for your life, which we'll see that these two souls take their positions in the soul wrestle over our life, and it is a fight for our life. Nothing less than that. Let's go straight into the text of chapter 9 in Tanya. The abode of the animal soul, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, known as the Nefesh Bahamis in Hebrew, is in the heart, in the left ventricle that is filled with blood. Hence, all lusts and boasting and anger and similar passions are in the heart, and from the heart they spread throughout the whole body, rising also to the brain and the head, so as to think and meditate about them and become cunning in them. Just as the blood has its source in the heart, and from the heart it circulates into every limb, rising also to the brain in the head. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman here is doing is he is locating the headquarters of the animal soul. And he says that the animal soul is sourced, is located, is headquartered in the heart, specifically in the left ventricle, the left chamber of the heart. That's where it sits. And from there it spreads to the rest of the body, including the brain. Now, this is not an anatomy class. Rabbi Shneur Zalman is not here to teach you biology. He's using the body's structure as a base to understand the soul's structure. And so there is a principle in Kabbalistic writings that anything in the physical world is an emanation and expression of the physical reality. If our body is shaped in a certain way, it's because our soul is also shaped that way metaphorically. And so here as well, we have a heart and we have a brain. And generally speaking, the heart and the brain represent emotions and intellect. These are the 2 centers of our personality, as we discussed in earlier chapters. That it's your mind, the way you think, your attitude, your heart, the way you feel, the way you interact with the outside world, these are the centers of your being. This is what makes you you. And so the fact that there are these two centers of our being, the mind and the heart, is understood by Rabbi Shneur Zalman as being a part of the struggle between the animal soul and the divine soul. Because the animal soul's headquarters are in the heart, and we'll see soon that the divine soul's headquarters are in the mind. Therefore, where the animal soul begins its conversation, where it starts to assert itself, is first in a desire, in a want for something. It starts with a passion, a lust, or the need to boast, to expand your ego, or get angry and get furious at somebody else. This starts in the heart, not in the brain. These are not intellectual decisions. One does not consider, think it through, and decide to have a lust. Or one does not analyze a situation, and after thinking it over for a while, saying, I think the appropriate reaction is to be furious and angry and to explode. That's not how it works. Anger, lust, and ego generally come from the heart, from an emotional reaction that is not thought out, that is not thought through. The animal soul starts in the heart. But it doesn't stay there, it doesn't remain in the heart, it spreads to the entire body, which means that the anger or the lust, the desire that you have, is expressed in bodily movement, that you'll chase after, you'll react, you'll express that anger or that lust. But more than that, it even goes to the brain, which means that your desire becomes justified. You start to argue, you start to develop arguments why your desire is appropriate. And so even though it started in the heart, it very quickly goes to the mind, and you come up with all types of explanations, excuses, and justifications why it is right what you're doing. And that movement is so quick that we're often not able to pick it up. We don't even notice that you are reacting emotionally to a circumstance, and your mind is coming to explain why it's justified. It's such a quick reaction, milliseconds between the emotional reaction and the intellectual justification, that you don't even notice it. But nevertheless, it started in the heart, it then goes to the brain, to the mind. And so, this is the headquarters of the animal soul, in the heart. You had a question?
Rabbi, because we understand so much today about the body-mind connection, could one extrapolate from that if a person were out of balance and maybe too much in the animal soul, that they could actually have heart problems?
It's an interesting question. Could you extrapolate from here that somebody's heart problems, medical problems, could be an animal soul issue? So the Kabbalists definitely say that our physical health and our spiritual health are intertwined and affected from each other, but not always is it so direct. You can't say every time that somebody with a heart problem it's an animal soul issue. It's more complicated, I guess, than that. Also, because the world is not fully aligned, spiritual and physical are not fully aligned in the current time in history, so therefore it's very possible for the physical body to have an ailment that is not an expression of the soul. In times of divine revelation, the body is a direct reflection of the soul. In times of divine concealment, what's called exile, when the divine presence is not revealed in the world, so you could have a body that does not express where its soul is. So a very healthy soul could be in a very unhealthy body, or vice versa. So this is an understanding of the animal soul's headquarters. Specifically, says the animal soul's place is in the left ventricle of the heart. Now, the left ventricle of the heart he describes as being the one that is filled with the blood. That's where the blood is developed. The right ventricle is different. Here he continues, the abode of the divine soul is in the mind, and from there it extends to all the limbs, and also in the heart. In the right ventricle, where there is no blood, as is written, the heart of the wise man is on his right. That's from the book of Proverbs. Says Rabbi Zalman, the divine soul's abode, its headquarters, its main source, is in the mind. It extends from there to the rest of the body, but it starts in the mind, including, its extension is also into the heart, but the right ventricle of the heart that is not full of blood. It is where the oxygen, the blood is oxygenated in the right ventricle, and so its main function is air as opposed to blood itself. Blood representing passion, which is the animal soul, whereas air representing clarity, the divine soul, not blood. The main point here, he's saying, is that the divine soul's headquarters is the mind. From there it goes to the heart, which means that for a true apprehension of godliness, of the divine, of that which is true, you will almost always have to start with the mind before going to the heart. While the heart readily desires the physical world, to have a desire, a passion, an excitement for the spiritual, you need to work on that through the mind. The mind has to develop an awareness of it. A simple way to illustrate this. When it comes to our physical needs, we don't need all that much education. A baby already knows that I'm hungry, I need to eat. A little child knows that there's fun to be had in this world, and that needs to be chased after. There's very little education needed to develop in a child's mind an appreciation for the goodies of this world, physical, material goodies. But to appreciate a spiritual truth, this is something that needs to be educated, that needs to be developed. It's not there innately. We all do have natural spiritual inclinations, but to have an awareness of that, to have a desire and excitement towards it, it needs to be introduced. It needs to be explained. It needs to be given words. So while we didn't need an introduction to eating and the pleasure of eating, it didn't have to be explained to us. We were never puzzled by it, and we never doubted it. No, none of us ever said, I'm not so sure eating is all that it's cracked up to be. Who says eating is so good? I don't think I need it. Our bodies are hungry and we eat. And we see food and we're attracted to it. We don't need to be taught. It's not an acquired taste to eat. But a spiritual truth, to enjoy prayer, to enjoy praying, that's not something that most of us would readily say we just got into. We saw it and we said, I want some of that. It's something that you need to learn, to work through, to come to an appreciation of. That's because a divine experience, to ignite the divine soul, it has to start with the mind developing an appreciation for the fact. Then the heart can get excited about it. Without the mind becoming more aware of it, the heart is not going to be excited by it. This is not true of animalistic desires. We see it, we desire it. We don't need explanation. So the divine soul rests primarily in the mind, in the brain. This is not to say that our mind is divine or intellect is divine. It's that intellect has the capacity the capacity to perceive that which is beyond us. This is what's unique about the mind. The mind is able to see that which is beyond, to appreciate that which is outside, something that that transcends myself. My heart can only react to what I like, what I see. My mind, can open new vistas, new realities that I didn't even know about. The heart cannot do that. So therefore, a pure spiritual emotion has to start in the mind. The mind has to develop an appreciation of goodness, of godliness, of the divine, of truth, and then the heart can get excited about it. This idea, at first, is a little bit discouraging. What it means is that the physical desires of this world are very available to us, are right there for us. We don't need to work on. Whereas the spiritual desires of the world are things that have to be worked on. It means that there's a bit of an uphill battle to do the right thing, to be a good person, to be a spiritually focused person, takes work. And indeed it does. That is reality. Because that side of us has to be achieved. Because that's what we're here for. If the purpose of our life would be to indulge, to enjoy life, if that's all we're here to do, to just enjoy, have pleasure, have fun, if that's all it would be, that is so not challenging. That's something that comes so naturally. There's nothing challenging about that. What's challenging is to have a deeper experience of pleasure that is not merely about feeding the body. To actually take pleasure in doing good. This is what we're here to achieve. The Kabbalists say a fascinating idea, that pleasure, taking pleasure, is something that is the deepest drive in the human being. Pleasure is what all of us seek on the highest level. There's almost no move we make, almost not a single move we make in our lives that is not pleasure seeking. If you think about anything that you do, pleasure is the impetus behind it. Eating, sleeping, even working is pleasure-based. Either it's the pleasure you get out of the act that you're doing, or it's the pleasure that you expect to get as a result of the act that you're doing. But there's got to be pleasure in it. If there's no pleasure in it, we are not motivated. We don't move. If you lose any sight of pleasure, if there's no pleasure in what you're doing, so then it's very hard to force yourself to do it. You have to at least be convinced that by forcing myself to do it, I'll get pleasure in the end. So, in the early stages of our life, we don't appreciate that process of working for something for the pleasure in the end. We want immediate gratification. And so therefore for a child, if it's not fun, then it's not interesting at all. Everything has to be fun. Learning has to be fun, and studying has to be fun, and exercise has to be fun, and everything has to be a game. If it's not a game, if there's no fun in it, so then I'm not doing it. We mature sometimes, and we realize that not everything has to be fun. It'll bring to fun. It'll bring to pleasure. You'll get there. So if you work really hard, it may not be fun, the work that you're doing. But if you work hard, and then you'll make a living, and you'll be able to have pleasure. You'll be able to feed your pleasures. And that is the only drive, that's the only thing that gets us to work. Unless we find immediate pleasure in the work, we need to find a pleasure that it leads to. Pleasure is the driving force behind everything we do. If you pick up a book to read, it's because there's a pleasure you get out of that book. There's a pleasure out of study, out of reading. The music that we listen to is because it gives us pleasure. Everything we do, pleasure is the drive behind it. And we can only justify pain meaning even effort, meaning any slight non-pleasure, we can only justify that if there's a pleasure that it will bring. This is just how it is. It's never going to change. This is the human reality. Pleasure is what drives us. What our mission is to refine that pleasure to be on a higher level. That pleasure does not have to be just self-fulfilling indulgence. There is a deeper type of pleasure. So just like the pleasure of eating a lolly is nice, but as you get older, there are deeper pleasures than eating a lolly. There's the pleasure of playing a sport, which for a little kid, a lolly is better. But as you get older, playing a sport is much more pleasure. Or playing music is a greater pleasure. Reading a book is a pleasure. Tell a little kid that reading a book is a pleasure, they don't get it. But as you get older, a book, an interesting book, is a great pleasure. You refining your pleasures from lolly to playing games to reading books. But it doesn't stop there. It can go even higher than that. There can be a pleasure in doing good. A pleasure in doing a mitzvah, a kind act. A pleasure in being spiritually connected. That pleasure is even more refined, even higher. And it's that pleasure that we're in this world to try and reach. To try and actually take pleasure in selfless acts, not selfish acts. A pleasure that is selfless, which can exist. You can have a pleasure that is selfless. In fact, the deepest pleasure is selflessness. Not that you act selfless in order to get pleasure. then it's not selfless. But there is a pleasure, there is a satisfaction, there is a sense of fulfillment in serving a higher purpose. And it's the divine soul that is our drive to look, that is looking for that. It's looking for pleasure in goodness, in altruism. And that starts in the mind. It's not going to start in the heart. The heart seeks immediate type of pleasure, concrete type of pleasure. The mind can appreciate that there's deeper pleasures than that. As your mind develops, as you deepen and you spiritualize your mind, your heart starts to chase a deeper pleasure. That's where the divine soul is heading towards. Now, Rabbi Shnei Zalman continues. Having understood that the divine soul rests in the mind and then influences the heart, whereas the animal soul starts in the heart and influences the mind. Rabbi Shnei Zalman points out that these two souls are inhabiting the same heart and the same mind. And therefore, he says, the body is called a small city. Just as two kings wage war over a town, which each wishes to capture and rule, that is to say, to dominate its inhabitants according to his will, so that they obey him in all that he decrees for them, so do the two souls, the divine and the animal soul, wage war against each other over the body and all its limbs. Meaning, it's not that your divine soul has its area of interest, your animal soul has its stuff that it's into, and they sort of try and avoid each other because they're on very two different topics. It's not like that. It's not like two roommates sharing a room. One of them is a slob that makes a mess everywhere. The other one is a neat freak that likes everything in its place. And so what they try to do is just sort of divide the apartment in a way that, okay, look, that's your corner, you do whatever you want there, but just don't come into my corner, leave me alone to let me do my thing over here. If it would be like that you have your divine soul that wants its spiritual life, it wants its altruism and goodness, and you've got your animal soul that's just there to indulge and have fun and be comfortable and look after itself. And each one just sort of does its own thing, that you've got your animal soul times, you've got your divine soul times. You've got the time when you could be altruistic and good, and then the times that you just indulge. If life would be that way, so then we would be conflicted beings, we'd have a double life, but we'd be able to handle it. That'd be okay. The problem is, neither soul is satisfied giving any space to the other soul. Neither soul will tolerate the other one having any dominion, any control, any footing whatsoever. Each one wants total control of you. It's a fight for your life, all of your life. The divine soul will not rest until it's got every bit of you. That every part of you is doing the right thing, doing that which is true and good and altruistic. It wants your entire being. And the animal soul also wants all of you, wants every single minute of your day to be self-serving, self-indulgent. It cannot tolerate any of its space being encroached upon by the divine soul. The metaphor used is like two kings fighting over a city. It's not like one of them says, okay, look, I'll have this half, you have that half. If you've got a city, you've got to have the whole city. You can't have two kings in one city. It doesn't work. You have to have one ruler with one set of rules calling the shots. It's you or me. It's a zero-sum game. They can't work together. Animal soul and divine soul cannot coexist as two rulers. One of them has to be calling the shots. And they are constantly fighting over who that will be. And this is what makes our life so exciting. That you've got one body, you've got one brain, you've got one heart, and you've got two souls. And neither of them are leaving in a hurry. Each one of them are digging their heels in and saying, I'm here to stay, and I'm going to be boss. And so at every single moment of our lives, only one of them is going to be in control. And it's not just in control, and this is my time for the next 20 minutes, it's in control and wanting to stay. And the other soul is very much aware of that and is not willing to give an inch. Not even the next half an hour is your time and I'll come back later. It is not willing to give an inch. There is a constant tension between these two souls inside of us. It's happening all the time. And so as soon as one soul seems to be getting a bit comfortable, the other one is going to assert itself fiercely to try and come back. And as soon as you try and suppress one soul to just get out of there, it's going to just strengthen itself to counterattack, to come back. It's not going to leave you alone. So, in case anyone was hoping for a path of tranquility from Tanya, Tanya does not offer that. Tanya does not offer the path to a peaceful, tranquil type of spirituality. That is certainly not the Hasidic and Kabbalistic way of viewing things. It is a battle, a struggle, and it always will be. That's how it's going to be. Yeah?
So what is our aim? Is our aim to having balance? Working
That we'll see. We'll see what the aim is, because Tanya, as the chapters of Tanya unravel, it's going to see. So what are we supposed to do if it's always going to be a battle? So what is the end goal? And we'll see that for some people, the battle is won, and for others, the battle is the goal. It doesn't go any further than that. And we'll see as Tanya unravels which one we are. Are we aiming to win the battle or just be in the battle? And there are different times in our lives as well where sometimes we have a bit of peace, but that's short-lived. The battle is still going to come. But we will see that. Now, what's interesting about this battle is it's so total. The way, what Rabbi Shneir Zalman here is trying to say in his metaphor that our body is a city and there's two kings trying to conquer that city and take total control over it. What that means is that the animal soul, when it wants to control our city, what that means is the animal soul is saying, I don't just want to be your animal soul. I don't just want to be your ugly, selfish, lowly drives. I want to be your total persona. I want to be you. I want to be everything about you. I want to claim your entire being for myself. Which means I even want to be your spirituality. I want to be in charge of your spiritual life as well. The animal soul is very aware that you are a physical person and you also have a spiritual side to you. The animal soul is respectful of that. The animal soul is not coming and saying, forget about the spiritual world, just become a hedonist, just a materialist, forget about all that. The animal soul wants to be everything of you, including your spiritual life. So our animal soul is much smarter than just saying, forget about being a good person, just be a selfish person. The animal soul knows that it will not win because we have this drive for goodness. We have a voice of the divine in us. We're not going to fall for being just a selfish person. Who would possibly buy a philosophy that tells you you've got to be selfish and that's it? There's no philosophy in the world that is that way. Just like there's no philosophy in the world that says, thou shalt be evil. Do evil. No philosophy in the world says that. There are philosophies that tell people to do evil, but they never call it that. They'll never present it as evil. They present it as good, as altruistic, as the right thing to do. The animal soul doesn't tell you, but be an animal, live instinctively. No, the animal soul says, I want all of you, including your spirituality. I want to be in charge of that. And so the way it does that is that the animal soul never presents itself in animalistic terms. It presents itself sometimes in very sophisticated spiritual terms in trying to convince us to go in its way. What this means is that if the animal soul can get us to live a spiritual life that is self-serving, that is in the end merely another form of indulgence, so then it's got all of us. Because not only are we eating and sleeping in a selfish way, but we could even be praying and doing acts of kindness in a selfish way. If the animal soul can get us to do that, then we're in its clutches. and then we will slowly be drifting on towards its side. Our divine voice will start to be blotted out. So you can be doing good, but only doing good when it suits you, when it's comfortable, when it feels right. But as soon as it's inconvenient, challenging, uncomfortable, rubs you the wrong way, so then that's not for me. As long as the me is the determining factor in your doing good, as long as it's what's right for me, if that's a determining factor, the animal soul has its foot in your spiritual life, and it's got all of you. And that is a slippery slope. Once your goodness is being done for selfish reasons, so then that goodness is not going to stay very good for very long. It's become another stage for the animal soul to express itself. And so, an example of this would be where you pick and choose which goodness you're willing to do. So, you determine your commitment to doing good, not based on the needs of the moment, not based on the demands of the situation, but based on what you feel is right. So you follow your instincts. Your instincts may be quite pure, but they're yours. And as long as it's yours, as long as you're following your instincts, what you feel good about, so then there's an element of self-servingness there, as opposed to altruism, which was what the divine soul wants. The divine soul wants you to do the right thing no matter what, whether it feels good or not, whether it's convenient or not, whether it sits well with you or not. It's the right thing. There's an ultimate goodness. There's an ultimate right and wrong. It's not about my feeling. It's about what is right. And so the test of it, the biggest test, whether you're doing good from the animal soul or you're doing good from the divine soul, is would you still do it if it didn't feel good? Would you still be doing this act if you didn't feel all that good about it? That's not an easy question to answer. That's very challenging, because we've all been in a situation where you're doing good and it doesn't feel good at all. Either because you're not appreciated for what you're doing, you're doing somebody a favor and they're throwing it back in your face. So that doesn't feel good. You don't have to become a schmutter. You don't have to become somebody's piece of garbage that they treat you bad. But are you only doing good for the recognition of it? Or are you doing good because it is good? The divine soul will say, you've got to do good even if you're not recognized. You've got to do good even if it doesn't feel all that good. The animal soul will say, hey, you're a person too. You've got your dignity. Why should you be doing this for them if they're not appreciating it? Now, of course, case by case, you have to analyze what's the right thing. Sometimes doing good for somebody when they are treating you bad is actually not ultimately good. If you're helping somebody and your help is just aiding them to be a worse person, maybe you're not helping them. If you're opening yourself up for abuse, that not necessarily is good. That may not be a good thing. So we're not talking about those type of cases. But we're saying when it just doesn't feel all that great, when it's not fun anymore, but is it good? Is it the right thing or not? The divine soul will say, it's not about how you're feeling about it, it's about whether it's right or wrong. The animal soul will say, this is not good for me, so I'm not interested in that. That's where the animal soul really wants to sneak in. Not just to get us to do bad, to get us to do good on its terms. Selfish good. This is where Rabbi Shneur Zalman lifts up our moral life as not just being questions of right and wrong, doing good things or doing bad things. Within your goodness, there's moral dilemmas. You know, I was looking around at moral dilemmas, the classic moral dilemmas that people present. I was just looking online, and it's very interesting. A lot of moral dilemmas that are presented in philosophy classes and that type of thing are not really moral dilemmas at all. There's no moral dilemma whatsoever. I saw one, for example, that said that imagine your boss comes to you and tells you, I want to tell you that the work you did on the presentation that I just gave to our client was outstanding. You did a fantastic job preparing me for that presentation. It was extremely successful, and it's because of you and the work that you did to prepare me for that meeting that we are signing a big deal, and I really want to appreciate the work that you've done. It's fantastic. You deserve a lot of recognition. Meanwhile, you didn't do it. It was actually somebody else who had done that work. Your boss mixed it up and gave you the credit for somebody else's work. So this philosopher was saying, so what do you do in this circumstance? Do you own up and say, well, it wasn't really me? Or do you take the credit and, why not? It's his mistake, not yours. That's not a moral dilemma. That's not a question. There's no real question there. That's a question: are you a selfish slob, or are you an honest person? That's not a moral dilemma. It's true. It feels good when somebody praises you, and you get points from your boss. That's true, but there's no real struggle there between right and wrong. It's very clear cut, right and wrong there. That is not a true moral dilemma. A moral dilemma is between two goods. That you are in a situation where you could help a person, but by helping that person, it's going to come out bad for another person. That's a moral dilemma. That you've got a limited amount of time, and so I'm on the way to helping somebody who needs me. But somebody else needs me as well. Now I've got a dilemma between two goods. What's the right thing to do? What should I be doing? This one or that one? That's a moral dilemma. But to take credit for something I didn't do or not, like that's actually not a moral dilemma. Rabbi Zalman here is saying that your animal soul wants all of you, which means that your animal soul is going to present opportunities to do good that are animalistic, that are really self-serving. And you need to know, is that right or wrong? And it's not always easy to tell. There's a story, I've told it many times, of Rabbi Tanya, one of the great Hasidic masters, who he had a policy that he did not keep any money overnight. That any money he had in his house, he would distribute to the poor, and he would never have any coins, anything left in his house overnight. Now, his family itself was quite a destitute family, but he refused to keep money overnight. He said, there are poor people, I can't sleep with money sitting there doing nothing. It has to be distributed. Now, he actually received a lot of money because he was a very holy man. People would come to him for blessings, and along with the blessing, they would give him a donation. And so he had a drawer full of money every day, but by the end of the day, it was gone. He would distribute it out. He would never keep any of it for himself. So it once happened that a person came to him needing a very important blessing, and the person was a rather wealthy person who offered 500 rubles, which was a lot of money back then. 500 rubles donation, please to give me a blessing. And so he gave him a blessing and he received the money. Right after that, another person came in, and this person was not seeking a blessing, was seeking help. What was the help the person needed? That they needed to marry off their daughter. They had no money. Their daughter had found an appropriate match to marry, but in those days the parents had to fork out all the money, and if it didn't work out, then the marriage wouldn't happen. And it was the bride's father who had to pay for it. So he says, my daughter's ready to get married, but I haven't got the money. I need 500 rubles to pay for the wedding. So Rabbi Chernobyl thinks, I just received 500 rubles a minute ago. Obviously it's for him. So he opens the drawer. As he puts his hand on the money, he stops and thinks, 500 rubles is a lot of money. I could help a lot of people with this. And there's a long line of people waiting to come for my advice and for help. If I give it all to this one person, then there's a lot of other people who are not going to get helped. I could give him a bit of it, and I could give other people. I might be able to help another 100 people. 500 rubles is a huge amount of money. And so he wasn't sure what to do. He hesitated for a moment and thought about it. He's got here, this is a moral dilemma. You've got two good things to do. To give 500 rubles to this guy, or to distribute 500 rubles amongst many needy people. That is a moral dilemma. Now, those who haven't heard the story before, What should he do? Give to more people. It's more mitzvahs, more good.
I think you should give to the one person.
Give to the one person? Why?
Because two reasons. One is helps build the next Jewish generation or future, but also part of the reason why he might be giving to a lot of people is to make himself feel good.
So one thing is that it's a very big mitzvah. A couple get married, start a new family, but also giving many people is building his ego, whereas the one person is not. Okay?
Tell him to come back at the end of the day.
And see what's left.
Yes.
Come back later and see what's left. There'll be nothing
Leave
left.
him out.
Yeah? I'll tell you what Rabbi Nachum's thought process was. He thought it through very carefully, and he said, I have to give it to this man, all of it to this man. Why? He says, because my initial thought was to give it to him. My second thought was to not give it to him. Why not give it to him? Because you can give it to many other people. But my initial thought was definitely my divine soul wanting to give. My next thought was my animal soul saying, don't give. It then gave a great justification why not to give, because you can give to so many other people. But the so many other people is theoretical. This is reality. There's a guy here who needs it. That first impulse was my divine soul wanting to give. The second thought was my animal soul wanting to not give. And his logic was that an act of goodness, when you want to do an act of goodness, someone's here that needs help and you want to do a good act, that is coming from the divine soul. To not do an act of goodness, even though the justification is to do more good, but the bottom line is it was countering my desire to do good. And that's not good. If my first reaction was, I've got to give him something, but not everything, okay, that's fair enough. But the fact that my first reaction was give, my second reaction was not give, that is my animal soul justifying not giving. So he gave it.
So I did want to discuss earlier that sometimes your instincts are your animal soul and they then convince very convincingly the brain. So how do we know in this circumstance that his first...
Well, here he had two instincts.
Yeah.
Before he thought it through, before he thought what was going on, there were two instincts. There was one to give and one to not give. So here you've got a clash of two instincts. Both of them have good arguments. He never entertained the thought of not giving anyone.
Yeah.
He never said, you know what, 500 rubles I could do with that money.
Yeah.
That was not a part of it. It was to give it now or to give it to many people. And so when you got two instincts, he then thought through, analyzed them, and said the one to give was a good instinct. The one to hold back and not give was being justified with good arguments, but it wasn't pure.
So there's no animal soul in play here?
No, it is. It is. That is an animal soul. Because you've got two voices,
Yeah.
you've got two conflicting voices there.
Yeah.
One of them's the right thing to do, one of them's not the right thing to do, even though they're both good. Giving to one person or giving to many people are both good. But they're countering each other. There's a clash here. So what's the real good? So he said, this is my animal soul who knows. It can't say, don't give charity. Keep money for yourself. His animal soul knows that is not an argument for him. That's not going to work. His animal soul knew it had to give a righteous justification for not giving. Once you're not giving, so who knows, the next person you might also not give to. Once there's the opportunity to not give, so then you might not give at all. So he said, in this clash of two voices, one of them was coming from a place of goodness, and one of them was dressing up as goodness.
But it sounds like his thought process of figuring out which one is which could have been the animal soul disguising itself.
It's very hard to say the animal soul wants to give 500 rubles to somebody.
Right.
It's very hard to see how the animal soul would argue that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real person in front of me asking for a donation, and I'm saying no.
Right.
That could be animal soul. That I'm saying yes, It's hard. It would be hard to in that case. This is a very deep story, by the way. We're talking about Rabbi Nachum Chernobyl. He was on a very high level, and so the subtlety of those two voices is here a very thin line between them. But that's how he worked it out.
Can I just ask, for me where it's a little bit tricky is that I think in the Western world, say, outside of Judaism, we're being inculcated with thinking that the heart is the seat of the emotion and the mind is rational and therefore perhaps more strategic and cold. So it's such a juxtaposition.
Correct. So this is a different way of looking at it, a different system. The mind, again, can be used to justify what the heart wants. But the mind is the part of us that is capable of being objective. And when we're objective, we can find truth. The heart is not capable of being objective. By definition, it's subjective. That's what it is. That's what it's supposed to be. The mind can capture the altruistic truth which is beyond us, which the heart cannot.
If we use the analogy of differentiating the animal world from the human world, maybe the animal world reacts more from animalistic.
Correct, and that's what it's meant to. The animal world is instinctive. An animal follows its instincts, and that's what it's made to do. The human being is beckoned to go beyond instinct, and to do something which is counterintuitive, even against your own self-preservation, for a higher purpose, for what's right, what's good. So this is the battle over the city that's going on. The animal soul wants to get into your moral life, into your goodness, and you should do good on its terms. The divine soul equally wants a total dominion over your life. It's not satisfied with your spiritual life. The divine soul wants your physical, material life also to be under its dominion. So just like the animal soul wants your spiritual life, the divine soul wants your physical life, wants your material life. It wants you to, in your physical world, in your eating and drinking and sleeping and working, it wants that to be imbued with purpose, with a sense of higher purpose. It's not satisfied with just being in shul. It wants to be at work, it wants to be in your home, it wants to be everywhere you go. There should be a divine purpose. And it will settle for no less than that. It doesn't work. Compartmentalizing our life doesn't work. If you spend time on your spiritual life, and then you have your physical, material life, and you sort of keep them separate. You do this when you're there, you do that when you're there. It doesn't work that way. It will not be settling. It won't be calming for you. Your divine soul will be dissatisfied. It won't be willing to stay in shul or to stay at your Friday night candles or in your meditation class. That's not where your divine soul is satisfied. It wants to get into every part of your life. And it slowly spreads its wings over every part of your life in a good way, in an elevating way. It can also backfire. There are sometimes situations where people allow their divine soul's desires to overtake their lives without taking into account their animal soul. That means somebody who tries to become a spiritualized being and ignore the physical world. That's not the divine soul's desire. It's not about becoming a hermit or a monk or denying the physical world. That will not be satisfying for the divine soul. It's that you should be in the world with a divine purpose. That's what the divine soul is looking for. And it will settle for nothing less than that. It will not settle for anything less. This is the battle that the two souls are going through, and therefore it's an all-encompassing battle. There's no area of your life that you can be left to peace. When you get into spirituality, your animal soul protests. When you get too materialistic, your divine soul protests. And they will not be silent. They will battle, and they will always battle. So he continues. It's the desire and the will of the divine soul that she alone rule over the person and direct him, and that all his limbs should obey her and surrender themselves completely to her and become a vehicle for her, as well as an instrument for her 10 faculties and 3 garments mentioned above, all of which should pervade the organs of the body, and the entire body should be permeated with them alone, to the exclusion of any alien influence, God forbid. This is just he's expressing here in detail. The divine soul wants your mind, your heart, they're the 10 faculties, the 3 intellectual faculties, the 7 emotional faculties, should be completely flooded with its desires. Your mind should be occupied with goodness, with holiness, with good thoughts. That your heart should desire only that which is pure, that which is true. And that the garments of your soul, thought, speech, and action, your behavior should be completely permeated. All your limbs, everything you do should be completely permeated with the divine. Which, again, this doesn't mean that you're sitting and praying all day. That's actually not what the divine soul wants. It wants that when you're not praying, it should be with a divine purpose. When you're not doing something that's innately spiritual, it should have a spiritual aim. It should strengthen the world of the holy. So you do have to eat and work and sleep and rest and have leisure time. You need all of those things. But the divine soul wants that all of that should be headed towards spirituality. It should be helping spirituality. That every move you make should be spiritual and no alien influence, God forbid. There should be no animalistic incursion whatsoever. This is the divine soul's desire. That is to say, that we saw in the previous chapters. That described in the previous chapters. The 3 intellectual faculties, the 7 emotional faculties, and the garments of behavior, thought, speech, and action.
Just go back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. He switched to feminine here.
Yeah, because soul in Hebrew is feminine. Neshama is feminine. Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just curious.
Correct. Okay. The word nefesh is a feminine word.
No women are the
So that is to say that the 3 brains that are in the head, the 3 intellectual faculties, should be permeated with Chabad of the divine soul. Remember, Chabad is Chachma Bina Dat, the 3 intellectual faculties of conceptualization, comprehension, and application. Conceiving of an idea, breaking it down, and then applying it, internalizing it. That's what Chabad stands for. That your mind should be permeated with the Chabad of the divine soul, meaning that your intellectual faculties are taking in divine reality, understanding God better, understanding goodness. This is what your mind is occupied with. The wisdom of God and the understanding of Him, by pondering on His unfathomable and infinite greatness. And from them shall be born through the dart, the knowledge, which is the application of intellect, or in his mind, and dread of God in his heart, as well as love of God that shall flare up like a glowing fire in his heart, like flaming coals, so that his soul shall yearn and long with passion and desire, to cleave to the blessed Ein Sof. This is describing the process, that the divine soul wants that your mind should be totally preoccupied with holiness, with goodness. When your mind is preoccupied with goodness, then your heart desires it. If your mind is not occupied with goodness, then your heart desires other things, selfish things. But when your mind is full of goodness, is full of holy thoughts, then your heart starts to desire it. What he's saying here is that the world that we inhabit is to a great extent a matter of choice. The world that we see, the world that we perceive around us, will depend on our own perception, on what our mind is full of. And so if you are following your heart's desires, your instinctive desires, so then you just see a physical world which has a lot of attractive things to fulfill your desires with, and that's what you chase after. And truth, God, divine, goodness, all this is abstract stuff. This is like in a book somewhere. It's not life. It's not what reality is. Whereas if you fill your mind with thoughts of goodness, if you preoccupy yourself with that by studying Torah, by studying works like Tanya, when your mind gets preoccupied like it has been in the last hour in these ideas, so then that stuff starts to become real for you. That is real. And the other stuff, the physical and material stuff, starts to lose its draw. It's just not so real anymore. It's an amazing experience, but anyone who's had it can testify. When you really delve into the study of these ideas, when you actually put your mind to it and really get into it, when you sit and read or you listen and you study these ideas, you become a little bit lifted off the ground, where the godly reality becomes real for you, and the material reality loses its significance somewhat. It becomes just a little less interesting. And so sometimes you have this experience after delving into these ideas where you walk out into the street and you sort of forget where you are, like what universe you're in. Like, it's like, what is everyone running around for? What are they doing? What are they about? You then get back into it and you start running around as well. But for a few moments, you're lifted off the ground, a few centimeters higher than the material and physical reality. This is the power that our mind has when you occupy your mind with holy thoughts. When you spend a bit of time meditating and praying, when you spend time studying these ideas, so then your heart actually desires to go further in that. You want more goodness, you want more holiness. This is where you plant yourself, this is where you direct yourself. That's not going to come by itself. It's not going to come on its own. On its own, the world presents itself with its material desires. But the divine soul wants us to fill our mind with that desire, and then our heart will chase after it. Our heart will light up like a flaming coal, wanting godliness, wanting goodness, wanting holiness. This is what the divine soul wants. Now, what we're going to see, God willing, next week is that we've described here the way that the divine soul wants us to live, permeating our mind with holiness, and therefore our heart chases after it with holiness. What the animal soul wants is the exact opposite. That we shouldn't get distracted, our minds should not get filled with holiness. We should just chase after our own physical, material needs. Just live a nice, quiet, comfortable life. Don't shake the boat. Don't try and get all holy-moly. Stay down here in this world and chase after our physical desires. But what's complicated about the animal soul is that it also, in the end, is a divine creation. It was created by God. And everything that God created is a part of His project. So what's the animal soul's real desire? If the animal soul is coming from God, if it is a godly creation, if it is a part of what God gave us, so then what is driving it? How can it really oppose God if God created it? And that we're going to see, God willing, next week. Tanya gives a fascinating and quite controversial explanation of what the true identity of the animal soul is. When we get its identity, we'll see how to deal with it much better. That'll be next week, God willing.